Welcome to the latest webcast in Caring.com's Digital Marketing Academy. Our session today is focused on helping your home care agency measure the success of your sales and marketing. I'm Denise Grob, a marketing director here at Caring.com, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Peter Droubay, who I'll introduce in more depth in just one moment. Before we dive into the presentation, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. As you may have figured out, this is a one-way webcast where only the presenters speak, but we definitely want you to ask questions, and you can ask them at any time during the presentation. We're going to have a Q&A toward the end. The number one question we get with every session is, are we recording and will we provide the slides? The answer is yes and yes. We have a blog where we'll post these in our archive, and we'll be sending out an email to all participants with the recording and the slide. Now, our featured presenter today is Peter Droubay. Some of you are already very familiar with him. We are thrilled to have him on the Caring.com team. He has extensive experience in the home care industry, including helping to build both Hallmark Home Care and the Senior's Choice, through which he trained over 800 franchisees worldwide. He is, in fact, a renowned trainer in sales and marketing. He's conducted over 4,000 training classes, seminars, and events like this, with a who's who of corporate America on his client roster and a proven track record in multiple industries. He's also authored dozens of corporate training programs currently in use and owned and operated salestrainer.com for 25 years. Peter is truly a top-notch trainer, has a wealth of practical knowledge, specifically in home care. And besides being a phenomenal professional, I really enjoy working with Peter. He's an all-around great guy, has some really wonderful real-life stories, and leaves you with both a smile and nuggets of valuable truth. Let's give you an overview of what we're going to cover today. Peter's going to start with the importance of measuring your sales numbers. Then he's going to take you through specific numbers and some simple definitions and tips for how to measure. And then, as I promised, we'll do a Q&A. All right, without further ado, Peter Droubay.
Why, thank you, Denise. I will send a check in the Christmas card for all those accolades. I appreciate it. It's good when you have friends, and it's even better when you pay them, right? So it's my pleasure to be here. Welcome, everybody, and welcome to the few, the brave, the proud, the serious. We joked ahead of time that the last couple of training events that I've done via the webinar program that we do here through our Digital Marketing Academy, we've had huge participation and, standing room only sort of thing, sellout crowds, all the accolades. And I joked that this particular one, we had a little bit lower registration. We're getting good attendance here today, but a little bit lower than normal. And the bottom line is because I put a terrible name to this. I put the word numbers in the title. And so suddenly that turns off half the industry. But those of you that are here, I know are the ones that are very serious and very excited about really doing well, because I can't stress enough how important this topic is. Now, before we begin here, it's very important as we go through, I'm going to give you quite a bit that I think is some of the most important information on sales and marketing for home care. Again, I've been in this industry a long time, coached a lot of agencies, and really when the rubber meets the road, when the bottom line comes down to these numbers that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to give you some points and some tips for measuring them quickly, easily. As we go through, though, I want to make sure that we all understand that the question is not, do I know this? Because most of what I'm going to share with you, you've heard before, and you technically know it, right? Some of you may even be really using it, and if so, then this will be great. You'll still get a couple tips here and there that'll help you. But for all of us, the question is always, am I doing this? Am I using it? Am I putting it in place? Because we can talk about all of this information till the cows come home, and if we don't do anything about it, it doesn't help us. And a lot of this that we're going to talk about, you will know, or at least you've heard some of, you've read some of, you've probably heard from other people. So I'm hoping that today, this webinar will inspire you to take action. That is, to start applying what we're going to talk about today, or to improve what you're currently doing. My guess is that some of what we're going to talk about you are doing, or you have done at one point or another. The question is, are you doing it lately, and how can you improve upon it? Now, a couple other things is I want to make sure that you understand I'm not going to use technical or exact accounting terms on purpose. This is not an accounting course. I'm trying to make this simple, easy, straight to the point. My personal experience is that in business, even though I've taken accounting classes and gone through various, programs to try and learn all the details and understand all my accounting and every last number, my day-to-day practice of it is that I need to boil it down to simple, easy to apply terms. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how do we measure the numbers in a way that's practical, easy. Not that the accounting isn't practical, it can be, but we're not going to get so far in depth that we're trying to read, balance sheets and reporting every single day. I'm going to share with you some keys that you do need to look at, some key metrics that you need to look at constantly, and how to look at those carefully. Now, I also want to make sure that you understand, and I'm sure this will be preliminary to our questions later on. I guess I'm heading off some questions. I'm not here to sell you technology. So I'm not going to give you recommendations on the latest software or tools to measure everything. And the reason I'm not going to go down that road is because there's a lot of great tools. I don't have a dog in that fight. Individually, I can certainly recommend ones that I've seen, but there may be something that comes out yesterday that is even better. So technology is a tool, and it certainly is a tool that you need to use, but this is not a program to try and sell you the latest software, the latest program to help you measure all these things. I'll mention some ideas about how to gather some of the information here, but this is not a program meant to sell you the technology. All right, with that in mind, let's talk about some management philosophy here. There are 3 steps to managing your business that, again, breaking it down to the most simplistic measurements, there's 3 things that you've got to be able to do well in business if you're going to run a successful business, no matter how small or how large, even if you're just, frankly, running your own life. The first category is you've got to define what it is you want, what it is you're after. I could do a whole 2-3 day seminar just on defining what we're after and how to structure your business in terms of goals and what you define as the outcome and things of that nature. That gets into your mission statements and into your values and into all sorts of stuff about how to define what we do. The second thing you have to be able to do is you've got to be able to communicate that to everybody, starting with clients. And again, I've done all sorts of webinars here in this format, and we've done some training courses that are available to our clients on how to communicate, how to tell people out there, the potential clients and their families, what it is we do, how to communicate what we do, but also internally within your organization, you have to be able to communicate the goals, the vision, the mission of your business. You've got to be able to communicate every process and every step. And again, we could do 2 or 3 day seminar just on communication methods and tools. To be a great manager of a business or of your own life, it starts by defining what it is you want and then communicating that effectively and constantly. The third is you've got to be able to measure. And that's what we're going to talk about today. It's define, communicate, and measure. Without this last step, the previous 2, they're important, they're impactful, but they don't carry nearly the weight as if we don't measure, right? We've got to measure what we're doing. So today we're talking about the measurement. We've done other webinars and things where we've talked about defining what you need and communicating it and selling it effectively. And there's a lot that we could talk about individually, or if I were coaching you individually, we might go through each one of these things to make sure that you've got all those things set up. But today is all about the measurement. The goal that you want in your business, and most of you, again, have had this goal, whether you say it out loud or whether you simply know that it's in your heart, the goal is to boil each part of the business down to key metrics that you can check daily, weekly, or monthly. In most cases, you want to at least check them weekly, right? Daily is even better sometimes. But these key metrics, you want to be able to, at a glance, see how's the business doing today? How's it doing this week? How's it doing monthly? Right? It's never a good thing to get the end of the year and try and figure out whether it was a good year or not, right? You should know this on a daily basis, and everything in the business needs to be done this way, right? Now, we know that in the business, there's essentially two sides of the book, right? There's the hiring side. We've got to be able to recruit, manage, train, caregivers, and make sure that we've got the staffing necessary to go out and serve our clients. And then the second side of the business, or the second half of the book, is that you've got to be able to bring in clients. And obviously, this is a business where you're matching up those 2 sides of the book. So there's key metrics on both sides. Today, we're going to talk about the sales metrics. Now, all of these metrics, you should be able to, back in the day when I first started, and I'm dating myself, and some of you are of my age, this was something that we wanted to boil down to a 3x5 card that fit in your pocket. Every day I wanted to walk in, pick up my 3x5 card, look at my key metrics, and know, and literally walk around with it, and use that to propel initiatives and things that I was doing. Nowadays, we have the advantage of having tablets and laptops and things like that, but this still needs to be a one-pager. It needs to be something that you see and you can see each metric. Obviously, that starts with defining what's the metric, how do we get to it, and then setting up a process so that we can see it every single day or every single week at least, at minimum every single month. Now, today we're going to address the marketing side. Like I said, there's two sides of the business. Today, we're just going to focus on the marketing and sales side of the business. Ultimately, we want to bring in more clients, but to do so, there's some key metrics we need to be able to measure. And then finally, we're going to keep it simple. There's lots of numbers we could calculate, but we want to focus on the most important, the most actionable numbers. And again, we can argue about what those are, but this is my opinion. And obviously we're here to, on this program where I'm offering my opinion to you as to what to measure and track to have the greatest impact on your marketing. So here it is. Here's what we're going to cover today. I'm going to go through each one of these. There's two numbers up top that we're going to talk about a lot because in my opinion, they inform the entire process. And that is your client value and then your client acquisition costs. I'll talk to you about how to calculate those, how to make sure you're looking at those quickly, easily, and constantly. Then we're going to get into sales process. And this is an area where a lot of agencies that I wind up working with, they've got a big problem in that they don't really have a sales process, right? And so without a sales process, it's tough to measure, but also without measurement, it's tough to have a sales process. And we'll come back to that and we'll talk about it. There's 6 numbers that you need to have in what I consider to be the ideal sales process. So we'll talk about that. So let's talk about the first number here, and it is perhaps the most important, and yet it's the one, and we literally, we talk to many of you, we've talked to this way. We do demos about our service with dozens of agencies every single week. And right in our demo, we ask about what's your client value? What's the lifetime value of your client? You could break it into different time segments than lifetime, but generally, what's the lifetime value of your client? And did you know very few agencies know? They generally know that there's such a number. Some of them know a bit. Many of them say, well, I used to calculate that, or I calculated that in the beginning, or people have told me. And yet this number, knowing this number, makes all sorts of impact on your marketing, on what you do and don't do, on how you structure your marketing, on what you stop doing, right? There's all sorts of things that this number impacts. And so it's vital that you be calculating it at least on a monthly basis. Now, it's not going to change dramatically every single month, but if you calculate it not only on a monthly basis, but also per marketing channel, and I'm going to talk to you about how to do that. So let's define it first. What is it? Well, the average client value, and you can do it for different times, but I like to start with what's known as the lifetime value of your client. And what we're talking about, the definition that is most common in the industry, and again, accounting is more of an art than a science. There's lots of ways to back into these numbers, but the common definition is the amount of gross profit that you realize from the average client over the life of the average engagement. Again, the amount of gross profit you realize from the average client over the life of the average engagement. Now, again, there's a lot of ways to back into this number. Some of the simplest ways is you start by simply figuring out what's your gross profit margin, right? You take your revenue and you subtract your costs of service. Those are the direct costs that you spend on primarily caregivers and their payroll, the fully burdened expense of providing the service, right? And that equals your gross profit margin. If you know your overall gross profit margin, then it's easy to figure out what's the gross profit margin per hour, per billable hour I'm talking about. All you have to do is divide that by the billable hours that you had during the month. That's pretty simple. You can also take and figure out what your average client bills in terms of average hours, right? How many hours per client? You simply take the total billable hours that you have during the month, you divide them by your clientele that billed any hours during that month, and you get the average. And what that allows you to do is then say, okay, so my average hours per client times my gross profit margin per hour equals my gross profit per client. And then you can multiply by the length of the engagement in order to get the lifetime value. This makes more sense when I break it into examples. And again, lots of ways to backing into this, but here's a simple example. Let's start with your pricing. Let's say that you've got a $25 per hour price. You've got direct costs of $15 per hour. That leaves you a gross profit margin of $10 per hour. In other words, it costs you $15 fully burdened to have a caregiver on site. You're charging $25. I know in some of your markets it's higher now, and that's okay. A few of you have lower costs, but that 25 is a good round number to work with. And the direct costs, I know that we've got pressures on labor, forces, and prices are going up, and minimum wage laws are changing and all that kind of stuff, right? We're not here to debate all that kind of stuff. If it's a simple thing of charging 25 and your direct costs are $15 per hour, you've got a gross profit margin per hour of $10. Knowing that, if you also know that your average client bills 80 hours per month, about 20 hours per week, for instance. So again, how do you arrive at that? You take your total billable hours and you divide it by your total clients served during that month or during that period of time, whether it's a month or a period of time. So let's say your average client is doing 80 hours per month. Now it's simple math, right? It's $10 times $80 and times 80 hours, and you got $800 per month for your average client. And let's say that your average length of engagement is 15 months, right? The industry tends to average between 14 and 18 months roughly. And suddenly you've got an easy math problem, right? It's $12,000 gross profit margin per client for the lifetime of the average client. Now, what does that mean? That means that average client, right? When you put them all together, you're earning in profit, in the margin, right? The gross profit margin, you're going to earn $12,000 over the life of that engagement with that client. Now, that doesn't mean that every client does that. You get some clients that obviously come in and they spend a couple hours and then they're done, right? For whatever reason, you don't get many hours. You get other clients that are with you for years, right? I had people that were with me for 5, 6, 10 years in one case. So the bottom line is that you can get a wide range per individual client, but you want to average that out because that helps you to decide on quite a few things that we'll go over. The industry average, by the way, is $8,000 to $12,000. Now, there's many ways to back into these numbers. The formulas I gave you earlier get you the actual numbers. What's my actual revenues minus my actual cost of service divided by my actual number of clients, right, in the month, and actual number of billable hours, right? All those things can get you to your numbers specifically. And this is something that I would work on calculating every single month at a minimum, right? Make sure that you've got a good running number for your client value, your lifetime value of a client. Now, you can also break this down by time frame. You can say, okay, what's my 1-year value or my quarterly value or my 6-month value? And that's when you get into making different decisions about cash flow and things like that. But the biggest thing to start with, because it changes all of your marketing perspective, is to start with the lifetime value. What is every client that I sign on going to be worth to me over the lifetime of that engagement? Now, why is this so important? Well, it's so important, and the reason it troubles me every time I talk to an agency that doesn't know these numbers, it's important because you know what to spend to acquire a client if you know the lifetime value. In other words, if I know that the lifetime value is $10,000, let's say, meaning that I'm going to earn $10,000 in profit, gross profit, in order to, or during the lifetime of that client. Now I know that I got up to that amount to spend and still be profitable. Theoretically, and I'm not suggesting this, but theoretically I could spend $9,999 in order to obtain a client that is going to become a $10,000 profit margin client, right? Theoretically, I could still be profitable there. I don't want to do that because there's other overhead expenses and things like that, as you know. But I know now what to spend to acquire a client. In that way, I can now compete effectively in the market. So people come to me all the time with questions about, should I raise my prices? Well, that depends on a lot of things. It depends on doing a price survey in your market, right? It depends on the cost of service for your caregivers. It depends on what your current margins are. It depends on all these things. And ultimately, it depends on this lifetime value of a client, what it's worth to you to obtain a client. People say, should I do a special, right? Where I offer, a few hours for free up front, or should I pay salespeople more money, or should I do a promotion? I remember years ago when I mean, this is many years ago, this is way back in my, late teens, early 20s probably. I was presented with an example back then that completely changed my thinking about it. And the example was of a dry cleaning business. And the two dry cleaners down the street from each other, one of them knows that every person that comes in spends $25 when they come in. And so they figure, well, I want to get new clients. And so they do everything they can to maximize getting clients in for that $25, including giving half off. And they think, man, this is a great promotion. I'm going to run a half off promotion and I'm going to get people in the door for 50% off. That way, they'll come back and I'll start making full money. Meanwhile, the dry cleaner down the street, who's a little bit more savvy in terms of marketing, has taken the time to calculate what their lifetime value of a client is. How many of those clients come back a second time and a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time and so on and so forth? And what's the total profit margin per client? And they suddenly come out with a promotion that says, if you bring your dry cleaning in, we give you a free TV set, right? A free flat screen. And the first dry cleaner can't understand it. What did they do? Did they rob a electronics store? Did something fall off the back of a truck? How in the world are they managing to do that and stay profitable? Well, they're managing to do that because they understand the lifetime value. They understand they're not going to make money in that first ticket, but they're looking to keep clients over time. Now, we're in a business which is one of the most beautiful businesses in this way, in that it is a business that is about repetitive hours being offered to the same clients. The goal is to acquire clients and to serve them effectively so that they stay with us. We obviously have some attrition. Some of the attrition is due to age, right? People do get worse sometimes in their acuity and they need to go get some different help than what we can supply. Other people pass away, right? But hopefully we're serving them well enough that they don't leave us in terms of a service provider. Hopefully we can keep clients for a length of time. And when you do that, it's a beautiful business because you've got this ongoing revenue stream. And calculating the value of that revenue stream and the profits on that revenue stream helps you to compete effectively in your market. Now you can answer questions like, should I pay a salesperson more, right? I know businesses that pay more in commission than what they earn on a sale in the first month. Why? Because they know that they're going to get more months out of that. In other words, I'm willing to give up the entire first month or even part of the second or third or fourth in order to get that client, to acquire that client. You've all gotten those mailers from AT&T or somebody like that says, here, cash this check for $200 as long as you start up with us, right? As long as you switch your carrier service over to AT&T. And you think, well, that's crazy because I only bill about, $50, $100 per month on my phone service. But what they know is that you're going to bill over and over and over again, and they've calculated their lifetime value. They know that the average client bills a certain number of months. I don't know what it is for them. So knowing how to compete effectively is completely dependent on knowing what the long-term value of a client is. Hopefully the lifetime value, but even if you had to calculate it for just the next year, that would help you to compete very effectively. It also helps you to know whether a marketing campaign is working, right? A lot of people give up on marketing campaigns way too early, right? I used to get people that came to me, this is, back in the early days when the only advertising we did was in the Yellow Pages, they would come in and say, hey, is it worth putting an ad in the Yellow Pages? And my answer is, well, that depends. Let's walk through it together, right? And we would take existing examples and we would break it down to the value of a client versus the cost of the Yellow Pages ad. And we would take a look at that Yellow Pages ad and say, will it bring back X number of clients in order to pay for itself and a margin beyond that, right? So knowing whether a marketing campaign is working is completely based on not what I get immediately. We get so many people, for instance, with us that, they'll start out and they'll get, 2, 3, 4 leads from us. And then they'll say, oh, I don't know if this is working. And we say, well, how could you even know? You've gotten 3 leads, right? You've gotten 4 leads. And the answer is, well, I haven't closed anybody yet. Well, yeah, but percentage wise, you're looking for one client and that one client is worth $10,000 and you've only spent 200 with us, right? It makes it so that you can change the way that the marketing campaign is valuable. So you get people that are able to stick with marketing campaigns knowing that their client value will easily surpass what is going on there. It also, in addition to that, it helps you to put up with the no's, right? A lot of people struggle when they get told no. And it's that old thing of, so many no's before I get a yes. And if you know that the client value is $10,000, $12,000 in profit, and you only need one client to get to that $10,000 or $12,000, right? It's easy to put up with a bunch of no's in order to get to the yes, right? It's easy to do the work knowing that I only need one, I only need two, I only need five, whatever the number is, in order to get to my numbers. Okay, so overall, it's a huge thing. It also helps you, as we've already mentioned, to know what to pay sales staff and so much more. Knowing your client value is absolutely critical. So that's step number one. If you don't calculate your client value on an ongoing basis, it's time to start. And you can grab the recording. We do record these webinars. You can go back through this. You can also get some additional help from a variety of people, can show you how to do this. But there's a dozen ways to back into the number. But the bottom line is you need to know what your client value is and measure it. And I would even recommend, ultimately, once you run your marketing campaigns, is measure it per marketing campaign. Figure out what the client value is. You obviously have to have a time in there so that as things have gone on, how long people are with you. But the bottom line is if you can figure out per campaign, you can figure out what the exact amount you can spend on each campaign is. Now that brings us to the second number that's absolutely critical, which is your client acquisition costs. Again, we ask this in every one of our demonstrations when we're talking about our services, because it's critical to what people do in terms of building their business up. And this is simply, what does it cost you to get a new client? And unfortunately, most people, again, don't know exactly. They generally know, and when we ask them some simple questions, they generally get a roundabout number there, but very rarely do they have it calculated out well. It's a very simple calculation. It's simply the amount you spend on marketing and sales divided by the number of new clients. In other words, if you spend X amount in a month and you got a certain amount of clients, you're going to simply divide the total amount you spent by the number of clients. I'll give you a couple examples in a moment, but it's a very, very simple calculation. Now, where it goes wrong sometimes is that people don't include all the marketing and sales costs, right? They simply look at the direct costs of whatever marketing or lead generation they're doing, and they forget the time and the hours involved, or the people or the personnel involved. They also sometimes aren't measuring the new clients appropriately. Sometimes they're putting new clients in different months and all that kind of stuff, right? It's the new starts each month that go into the marketing and sales numbers total, and it gets you the total. So include all your marketing and sales costs, including your own time, by the way. If you're a solo operator, or if you're running the business, but you're still doing the assessments, or if you're still making some of the calls, include your time, right? Log your time and include it in this sales and marketing acquisition cost analysis and client acquisition costs, so that you know what ultimately you're spending to get a new client. Now, it needs to be calculated over a longer period of time, as marketing and sales processes can take a while to produce results. For instance, the way that we traditionally, when I first started in the business and up until, about 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, most of our business was done primarily through referral marketing. In other words, we went out to every professional that could refer business to us. And a lot of people would say, as I would ask them, what's your client acquisition cost? They'd say, oh, it costs nothing. I mean, I just get these referrals and they turn into clients. And I say, well, no, they don't cost nothing, right? How many months did you spend courting that one referrer, courting that one discharge planner, that one doctor's office, whoever it is, right? How many months, what did you do? How much gas money did you spend driving over there? How many cookies and candy and sandwiches did you drop off? Whatever you did to ingratiate yourself there. How many rounds of golf did you play? How many trade shows and fairs did you go to and shake hands and press the flat? And it might have taken 6 months to get that referral partner to start referring to you. And then over time, you've grown that relationship to where now they're referring a steady amount. But that's why you have to calculate it over a longer period of time. In the beginning, you might have been spending $5,000, $6,000, $10,000 a month for several months in order to build up this referral network. And once you build it up, now it's a beautiful thing. But it's kind of like the software companies that spend all that money up front on software and then recoup it over time as they sell the licenses to the software. So in our case, you might have spent tens of thousands, maybe even more, on developing these referral agents, these referral relationships. And now as they start paying off, as they start referring, now you're seeing the effect of that. And unfortunately, too many people only measure it in month, right? They only measure, well, I only spent, X amount this month and I got 10 new clients, therefore it's very low. The truth is you spent a long time building up that referral network. Now in your marketing and lead generation costs, in your pure marketing, or if you're buying leads from somebody like us or anybody else, now it's a very clear one-to-one ratio sometimes between what you see in month versus your new starts. But even then, a lot of leads take more than a month to turn into something, right? Some people you get a lead for are still in rehab, and it's going to take them 6 weeks to get out of rehab, and they're calling now because they know they need home care when they get out. Well, that's a fantastic lead, but it might take you 6 weeks to turn that into a client. So again, do this over time. I recommend that you're looking at least at a 6-month trailing, measurement here in order to get your accurate client acquisition costs. And then finally, for the industry currently, and I know that this last year, COVID has thrown us for a loop, and the numbers are a little fuzzy over this last year because of some changes. Our referral networks have been interrupted and things like that. But generally for the industry prior to that, it was generally averaging between 1,000 and 2,000, right? For newer agencies, it was 2,000. I've even met some that it was close to 3,000 in the beginning. If you have built up a traditional referral system where you get a lot of leads in off of referrals, again, you might have spent a lot of money up front, but now it's coming down. And so maybe you get it under 1,000, but generally it's between 1,000 and 2,000 for most agencies. Now it's a beautiful business, isn't it? Right? If you can acquire clients for $1,000 or $1,500, let's say, and each of those clients bring back $10,000 in gross profit margin over the lifetime, it's a beautiful business. You spend $1,500, you get 10,000 back, right? All you're doing is you're building up a time over which that 10,000 comes back. So that's the process. So again, a couple examples here to help this along. A simple professional referral example. If you have a marketer in your business that you're spending money on and fully burdened, let's say they're making $5,000 a month. That may seem low in your market. It may seem high in your market. Again, it varies across the country. But let's say as an average, it's $5,000 per month that you're spending for this full-time salesperson / marketer. They're going out and talking to referral agencies. They're going out and beating the bushes and looking for people to refer business in. If you're also spending an extra $1,000 a month on maintaining your website, on a couple of small ads, on some collateral, some business cards, some flyers, that kind of stuff, right? If your total spend were $6,000 and you got 6 new clients on average per month from that, then it's a very simple calculation, isn't it? Right? It's $1,000 per. Now, again, on the lead side of it, it's almost easier to calculate when you're talking about leads, right? In a lead gen example, if you're buying leads or if you're marketing purely for leads that come in through other sources, if you can get 100 leads in a month and you're spending $5,000 to do that, again, through your own website, through buying leads from us, through other lead generators, right? Wherever you can get leads, let's say you get 100 leads in the month and it costs you $5,000 to do so. On average, about $50 a lead. If you also have a salesperson or a couple of people that involve themselves in sales, again, here's where you need a budget time. If you have people that are doing half and half, right? If you're doing part of your time in sales, you need to allocate that time towards it. But let's say you're also paying a salesperson on average, fully burdened cost about $5,000 a month in order to produce, in order to turn these leads into clients. Now you've got 10,000, and if you get 10% or 10 people, 10 leads in, you've just spent, again, what is it? About $1,000, right? About $1,000 in acquisition costs. Again, all these numbers could change, right? Whether or not you spend $5,000 a month on leads, whether or not you have a salesperson fully dedicated $5,000 a month, or if there's some smaller portion of that, that's completely up to you. Or you could have 2 or 3 salespeople involved, right? Those numbers change as you go. And all of these numbers help to inform whether you hire those extra people, right? So at the end of the day, the calculation is simple. It's simply the total amount you spend on sales and marketing divided by the new starts during that period of time. If you're doing it for a month, then you do it on a monthly basis that way. Okay? Now, the big question is, and one of the big questions that you always want to ask yourself is each marketing channel successful? In business school, they talk about marketing channels, which is an irrigation metaphor, right? Irrigation channels in order to irrigate a field of crops. Well, I've never been a farmer. So I don't know much about irrigation. The other metaphor that gets used often is pillars that support a building, right? It's never good to have a building that's supported by one pillar. You always want a building supported by multiple pillars. And in the irrigation metaphor, you want irrigation ditches or channels to move out to the field in multiple ways, right? You want multiple irrigation channels. Otherwise, you get the effect of only crops growing by the one. So the bottom line is, in your business, you need to have a variety of different marketing channels, different marketing methods. But the question is, are each of them successful, right? Or is one of them accounting or is one of them making up for the rest, right? Are many of them losing money and there's only one or two that are successful? Well, you want to figure that out. So how do you figure it out? Is you want to ask yourself constantly the question, does that marketing channel produce enough gross profit to more than cover the client acquisition costs for that channel? So you can take each of these numbers and break it down to just one channel. You say, okay, I'm getting leads from caring.com. What does it cost me, right? What's the time involvement there? And what's the return? And does that produce enough gross profit to more than cover the client acquisition costs in that channel? If it's my referral networking, right? Does that do it? If I'm doing speaking engagements in the community, right? If I'm doing advertising in any publication, again, people used to say, do I advertise in the yellow pages? Those have gone away now. But the answer was, what does it cost and what do you expect to produce out of it? Let's take a look at what others have produced out of that type of deal. And if you get a certain number of clients and it only costs a certain amount, then it is, right? So you want to always look at it by channel as well as by the business overall. In fact, by channel, you want to set what's called contribution margin. In other words, what's the gross profit margin that you want contributed to your bottom line from that channel? And most businesses set thresholds, right? My cost for marketing method will not exceed 50% of the gross profit margin that it generates, for instance, right? That's a threshold. Some people say 30, some people say 50. I've seen people say as high as 70% at times, right? But what's the threshold that I will spend in client acquisition costs in order to achieve that amount of clients, right? Based on my client value. So the bottom line is you want to be able to measure these numbers. I can't say enough about client value and client acquisition costs, right? Your lifetime value of a client is so critical to know, and your client acquisition cost per channel and overall is absolutely critical to know. Again, I wouldn't be harping on this, except that most agencies I talk to, we kind of know generally, but not really, right? In fact, a lot of agencies just flat out tell me they don't know. Now, at the end of the day, it comes down to two simple questions, right? How much did I spend? How much did I get back? Right? The best at any lead generation source, at the end of the day, that's what they're ultimately asking. How much did I spend? How much did I get back? We have a client that a year ago sent us their whole deal. He does a very good measurement of it. He sent in that he showed us his whole numbers. He made to date, he had spent $5,000 in the previous year on his listing and all of the things that come with his listing and the leads that he got from caring.com. That $5,000, it was just under 5,000, it was 49 something. That $5,000 had already turned into, in the year that followed, $140,000 in revenue, of which he calculated the gross profit margin. It was about 40%, right? So he had made about $60,000, a little bit more than that, in gross profit margin off of $5,000 that he spent. So is it worth it to spend $5,000 in order to get $64,000 back? And the answer was absolutely yes, right? It's worth it every single time. But in order to get there, he has to know that he's got to measure it over time. He's got to look at what's the total client value, what's the acquisition cost, and then let the thing run for the entire length of the time. How much did I spend and how much did I get back? And these numbers, client value and client acquisition costs, are an attempt to forecast what the answers to these two questions are, right? We want to be able to, in advance, determine what the answers to these questions will be a year from now, right? A year from now, we can say, well, I spent this much and I got this much back. And I knew that would be the case because I forecasted it based on client acquisition costs and based on my client value. All right, so those are the two most important numbers. Now let's talk quickly about numbers to maximize your sales efforts, because Again, client acquisition cost, client value. The client value is less determined by how well you're selling, right? One, because it's after clients come on, but the client acquisition costs are impacted by, in many cases, the percentages that you sell. So your sales process has to be there. And so a marketing and sales system has to be built. And if it's built without measurements, then it's not a system at all. Okay? And unfortunately, many of us know that we should be measuring certain things and we don't. And so consequently, we don't have a sales system. The first step to improving anything in life is to measure it, right? If we're trying to lose weight, we got to step on the scale. And if you want to improve it seriously, then you start measuring it more often. You start stepping on the scale every day, or at least once a week, right? So the bottom line is you've got to start measuring in order to improve any system. And again, I will repeat this over and over again. A sales system is not a sales system unless you are measuring it. So let's take the steps in the plan, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about the steps that I recommend here in just a moment. But every step in your sales plan needs to be defined. There needs to be a script or a process that goes along with it, right? So that you and your staff do it the same way every time. And you must measure every step. If you don't measure it, it quickly devolves until it's just non-existent, right? If there's supposed to be calls being made, right, to follow up on leads that I get from various sources, leads that come in from my website, if we're supposed to make calls, but I never measure those calls, I guarantee you that you and your staff will stop making those calls. Oh, you won't think so. You'll say, oh, I call them all, right? But the truth is, I promise you that the number of calls get fewer and fewer and fewer if you're not measuring it, right? In any business, if you don't measure it, it devolves until it's non-existent. When you do measure it in your business, everyone in the business, right? And if you're talking as a solo operator, obviously this talks to you, but most of you on this call have lots of people that work with you and for you. When you start measuring things, it tells everybody in the business that that is something important, and everybody looks to improve it. So when you start measuring the number of calls that you make, right? Or how quickly you make the calls, or the call depth, in other words, how many times you call that person. When you start measuring that, it tells everybody, you know what, it's important to call quickly, to call many times, and to make these calls every single day. If we don't, right, it's known. And having it known makes it important, right? When you shine a light on it, it suddenly becomes important, just like on a stage. We shine a spotlight on the person on stage, they become important. We shine a spotlight on a number by measuring it, and it becomes important. Now, let's talk about the specific numbers, and they have to do with the sales process. And here's where some of you have attended some other webinars that I've done, and you know that I advocate a very specific sales process. Some agencies don't follow the sales process. Some people have different ideas about how it should work. My experience is simply through working with hundreds of franchisees that I've coached over the years and working with them and seeing the difference. And I advocate that your sales process needs to be one in which you're calling, connecting with people, having a conversation, but that initial conversation is not to sell them or to qualify them over the phone, right? We do none of that, right? We're simply building rapport, creating interest, and setting an appointment to be in person with them. I know that COVID has interrupted the in-person thing. We've had to do it virtually in a lot of cases, but still, you want to set an appointment. You want to set an appointment, and what do you do during that appointment? You do a fantastic assessment. If you don't know, if you want to know more about that process, I did a webinar last month on that process exactly. And here's my experience is that when you run the numbers, again, and you measure each one of these steps, what you'll find is that you can get the same number of leads in. So let's say you get 100 leads in for each way of doing it, and you're going to get about the same contact rate, right? Not every lead returns your calls. Some people screen your calls, all that kind of stuff, right? So you get about 80% typically if you're calling enough. And so you get 80% in both, but then the numbers start to diverge. If you're trying to sell over the phone, if all you're trying to do is qualify them and determine whether they're a good lead or a bad lead, and then you're trying to quote rates and sell them right over the phone, you're going to get at best about 10%. And the really good salespeople, they'll get between 8 and 12%, about 10% being the average. So out of 100 leads, you might get 8, right? 8 of those, about 8% of the total leads turn into clients, about 10% of the ones that you actually speak to. But if you go through and you set an appointment for an assessment, you don't overly qualify, right? You don't try and sell on the phone, and instead you set an appointment. and then you go to that appointment, you'll find a much higher ratio of people that say yes. In fact, consistently, I've found 200% more clients, or tripling of the number, right? By simply making sure that you do that. Now, there's more time involvement, certainly, right? You can measure that and determine whether it's worthwhile for you to spend the time. But in my book, again, when I go back to client value, the value of 16 more clients in this example is huge, right? $10,000 value, lifetime value, right? That's $160,000. I'd be hard pressed to spend too much time to make that not worth it. In other words, some people say, well, I don't want to spend the time doing assessments. That costs more, right? It costs me more to get people on board to do an assessment, or for me to go do the assessments all the time. I don't want to do that many assessments. Well, you're being foolish. You're not running the numbers properly, right? The numbers show that it's more than worth it to hire 3 people to do the assessments, 5 people to do the assessments. You will come out with a bigger number at the end in terms of clients, and your client value dictates that. So again, another reason why knowing your client value is critical. The difference in clientele that you get from these different percentages is huge, and it makes all of that extra effort worthwhile. Now, let's go back to the process then and take a look at each step. So again, the first thing that needs to be quantified is leads generated. And this sounds like an obvious one, but frankly, I talk to a lot of people that don't know how many leads came in last week, or they generally know, but they're kind of fudging on some, right? I talked to somebody just last week that was telling me, oh, well, I don't count every one of them. I don't put them all in my system. And I said, well, why not? He said, well, some of them I can't get a hold of, or some of them, I just don't think they're good leads. But it still is a lead, right? It came in off your website. I don't care if they put in Mickey Mouse in the name, form field. The bottom line is you still need to call it. So the bottom line is you need to measure it. Measure the leads generated. It will start to improve. Be completely honest. Count everything. Second thing is outbound calls, right? We need to count the number of outbound calls, not only the call counts, but then the number of calls to each new lead. That's called your call depth. How many times do you have to call in order to reach people, right? Most good businesses, most good sales organizations have call depths that are up in the average, anywhere from 4 to 10, right? But that means that some people you're calling 20 times to get a hold of them, and other people you reached on the first call, right? That's just the way of the world. It takes, most sales statisticians will tell you that these days it's taking between 8 and 12 calls on average to reach people. So your call depth better be at least 8 to 12, right? And then your call cadence is how quickly you call. The most successful these days are calling multiple times right in the first couple days, right? 3 times the first day, 3 times the next day in order to reach people. And they are reaching people a lot that way. So someone fills out a form on your website, somebody comes in as a lead from caring.com, you need to call it and call it quickly, but you need to count every time. And those numbers need to be there. So every day, you should be in a situation where every day you can see, okay, how many leads did we generate yesterday? How many calls did we make yesterday? And what's our call depth and what's our call cadence look like? Conversations are the number of people you actually speak to, right? How many picked up and engaged with you? That's the contact rate, if you want to boil it down to a percentage. You also need to then, that's all about setting assessments. You need to measure the number of assessments set. So many agencies don't measure this as a measurement, and consequently, they don't focus on it. As soon as we start measuring it, it makes it clear to everyone in the business, my goal is to set an assessment. I've got to set the assessment, right? When I talk to this person, number one goal, set the assessment. Why? Because we're shining a light on it. We're measuring it, right? And now we get to our assessment setting rate, okay? Then we've got to measure the number that are done. A few will fall out. Things happen, right? Typically, it's a high percentage that complete, but the bottom line is you want to figure it out, because if they're not completing, if only 50% are completing, that's way too low. That tells you that they're not being set properly. So you can go back upstream and change some things. And then finally, the number of new starts or your close ratio. In other words, out of all your assessments, how many actually become clients, right? That's critical to know the real numbers. So again, know the real numbers for each of these. Now, I had a sales director years ago that had a little quip that I'm sure he stole from somebody else, because I've heard other people use it. And this is way back. We used to fill out daily physical reports. Afterwards, it went to, just a spreadsheet on a computer, and then eventually went to online things. But still, we used to have to measure everything. And this sales manager of mine said, I make the box small, the one that you put the number in, right? He would say, fill in this box with the number of calls. And he says, I make the box small so a story won't fit, right? Meaning he just wants the number. I don't care what the story is. I don't want the excuse. I just want to know, how many calls did you make? How many people did you reach? Right? In other words, how many engagements? How many appointments did you set? How many appointments got done? That's all I need to know. I need to know the numbers. Don't give me a story. The story won't fit in the box, right? I made it small enough that I just need a number. And from that number, we'll determine what we need to improve. Here's the final thing here, and then we'll go to Q&A, and that is some benchmarks on the sales process. Here's what I've found over the years in working with agencies and working with my own businesses. And it doesn't mean that you're going to get all of these numbers, but this is what you could and should be shooting for, in my opinion, okay? Leads generated, I would look to build systems to where you generate at least 20 leads per week, right? If you have to buy some of those, if you have to, get them from your website. Now, many of you are much beyond that. You've built your systems beyond that. And if that's the case, then shoot for the next big number. If it's 30, if it's 40, if it's 50. But 20 new leads per week is where I would start. Focus on getting 20 leads per week from one source or another. Now, by the way, that means your business needs to be in the habit of measuring every call that comes in, every web form that gets filled out, every email you get, every new lead that comes into your business needs to be tallied as a new lead. It should be a minimum of 20 per week. The calls, I always used to give my people a minimum of 200, that's 40 per day calls that they had to make. Now, eventually we got leads generated up much higher than 20, and so they were making many more calls than that. But that's 200 per week, plus they need to do emails and text messages. And again, I need to measure this. It needs to be a standard. Below this is not acceptable, right? Now, by the way, you say, well, how can you make 200 calls if you have 20 coming in? Well, they don't all answer on the first call. Like I said, sometimes it takes 8 to 10 calls to get somebody on the phone. Some people answer the very first call. Some people it takes 2, 3, 4. And by the way, no, that doesn't make them a bad lead. It makes them a busy person. In today's day and age, you don't answer every phone call either. You screen a lot of calls, you're busy, you let a lot go to voicemail, that kind of thing, right? So just know that and just make the calls. And if it takes 6 calls to get to somebody, that's okay. They're still a good lead. They're still somebody you want to work with, right? So measure the calls. Next thing is conversation contact rates. I always mandated on a 20 lead week, right? We need at least 16 conversations per week. And over time, I need 16 conversations period, because we're working on a backlog of leads at that point, ones we couldn't reach in the first week. So I always looked for an 80% lead contact rate. Ultimately, that's what I was shooting for. If I couldn't get that, then I looked for different ways of making it work, right? Did I need to text them quicker? Did I need to email them quicker? Did I need to call more times, up the call cadence, deepen the call depth, right? What do I need to do to get to an 80% lead contact rate? Now, by the way, the opposite of that is the fact, and that is that 20% are not going to answer you. And just knowing that helps you know that the system is that way. It's just, somebody fills out a form on your website, they're not all going to answer your call. It just happens, right? So you want to do your best to keep it to 80, but understand that there's going to be 20 no matter what. The assessment set, I always wanted 10 new assessments set every single week, right? And I was looking for a 60% appointment setting rate. And by the way, when you look for those standards, they tend to happen, right? We consistently got our appointment setters up to that rate. I always looked for 8 minimum to be done. In other words, we only had a 20% fallout on assessments. Typically it was 8 to 9, 85% is the target that I was constantly looking for. If we were setting them appropriately, again, sending all the information, doing all the stuff, showing up on time, all that kind of stuff, typically it was an 85% completion rate. But a few did fall out. And then finally, I was looking at a 60% close rate or higher. In most cases, we got much higher than 60%. In other words, once we do an assessment, if we do it well, we're going to get a new client out of more than 60% of them. So those are the benchmarks that we constantly sought for. But again, you can only benchmark if you're measuring. So I go back to this principle in general. Measurement, measurement, measurement. Last comment here. It's like a batting average, right? You've got to have volume over time. If you work on it, you can hit between 20 and 30 out of 100. If you're a pro baseball player, for instance, batting 200, batting 300, stellar numbers, right? And in business, same way. You can get to the point where 20, 30% of your leads are converting in 20 or 30 out of 100. But I don't know if it's going to be the first 20, the last 20, or some at-bats in the middle of that cycle. And if you've done any sales work, which most of you obviously have, if you've watched baseball at all, people go in streaks. right? I don't know what it is. There's something in the air, something in your attitude, something in your energy. When you close one deal, it's easier to close the next one, right? You tend to go in a streak. And so some people say, well, I don't know. I'm going to test this out. I'm going to take the first 5 leads that come off my website to see if my website is working. No, you don't do that, right? You take 100 leads. You work with them. You have to have volume in order to make it. It has to be statistically significant. And I go back to these questions. Measure every month, but commit to a year or more of a marketing campaign and ask yourself, how much did I spend on that campaign versus how much I earned back, right? What's my client acquisition cost versus my client value? All right, and then finally, I invite you to work with us to increase your lead flow. If you need more leads, we have lots of leads. It depends on your area, obviously. We screen and qualify leads, so we can't promise leads. They have to be qualified. But if you get really good at converting leads into clients, you need more, right? You just need to amp it up. And we can help you with listings on high-ranking sites, tools to gather reviews and manage your online reputation, which is critical in this whole flow. We can get you screened leads and education on how to convert them. So that's my pitch. If you're not currently a client with clearing.com, you need to be. And then finally, let's go to Q&A.
I can help with that, Peter.
Yep.
One question we had was, should they be including recruiting costs in the cost of acquisition for the clients?
No. You want to, there, again, accounting is more of an art than a science. You can do all sorts of different things if you want to. I've seen people do some very, very interesting, in my mind, convoluted things. So I'm not telling you that you can't ever do that. But the bottom line is no. You want to run the 2 sides of the book as 2 sides of the book. You want a different set of metrics on your hiring. I hear a lot, by the way, and this webinar is not meant to be on the hiring process. I hear a lot of people complaining about hiring, and I know the hiring markets are tight right now for a lot of reasons I won't get into. But you need a system, just like you need a sales system, you need a system on your hiring side with key metrics that you're running for that system as well. And then obviously, there's going to be some costs there, but I don't generally put, I didn't ever put my recruitment costs into my client acquisition costs.
Okay,
it's
great.
hard to get a 1-to-1, yeah.
And then there was also a question about benchmarking, and you had referenced some stats from your history, and the question was about how big was the agency in your comparisons, what was the average census for those, or how to measure using benchmarks.
All right, so there's been several studies that have been used throughout the industry. Home Care Pulse is still doing their benchmarking survey every year, and that's excellent. MetLife used to do a phenomenal one. I think they still are. I haven't looked at it in the last year or two. There's a couple others out there that do a great job. But some of the numbers that I'm sharing are from my own personal experience in working with hundreds of franchisees that I was involved in training and working with throughout the country. So we had our own internal benchmarking, numbers and studies and surveys. And then my own personal experience in working with individual agencies is where some of the numbers that I'm quoting come from.
Okay, great. And would you say that these numbers also apply to home health care?
So no, home health care has a different, so a lot of what we talked about do apply, but the client value and client acquisition costs for home health care can be very different. Obviously, client value in home health, you're billing based on prescription or medical procedure, and you're billing Medicare for the most part, or private insurance. So it's a very different billing process. It's not an hourly billing process, but you still should get to a client value, and a little bit different numbers involved, and you should still get to a client acquisition cost. And so those things definitely apply. But some of the numbers that I gave as examples don't necessarily apply to medical billing.
Okay, great. And several of the questions are specific to the client assessment webinar that we did last month. So for those folks, we'll be sure to include those materials for you in our follow-up email, so you have access to that. Peter covered in that a cadence for follow-up and doing the assessment. So some of those questions we're getting about deep in the assessment are covered in that session. Okay, and then we're also getting our regular questions about will the slides and recording be available, and the answer is yes. And the good news is that one of the questions was calculating the average lifetime value of a client, and that is covered in the slides. Is there anything you would add there, Peter?
No, other than, I tried to simplify it. And technically I backed into it two different ways on the slides. The first one I had you calculating, total revenue minus cost of service or, direct costs, and then running it that way. The second one, I actually, in the example, I actually took your actual billable rates minus, what you pay caregivers, similar. So there's a variety of ways you can get into the numbers, but at the end of the day, the principle is the same. You're trying to figure out over the lifetime of an average client, right? Again, figuring out what your average is. So of the average client, what am I going to earn in gross profit from the average client? Because that allows me to make decisions about how to acquire that client, right?
Okay, that's great. I think we've covered all of the questions about the sales numbers. We are getting a question about how to contact you. So maybe we could summarize the slides and get to the contact information. And those of you that didn't get your question answered because it was related to the prior webinar or specific to your carrying account, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly afterward.
Yeah. And in fact, I will take a moment if I know we're getting tight on time here, but there is one question that I will refer you, just like Denise said, to the last webinar, but it has to do with having nurses do sales assessments, client assessments. And we covered that in the last webinar, but I will say that nurses are fantastic in doing it if you train them in sales techniques. Some nurses get a little dry and a little clinical and they don't sell very well. Others are fantastic, but they need to have some sales skills. Okay?
Thank you, Peter.
You bet. So yes, well, that slide got weird. So I'm not sure what happened to this slide here, but the bottom line is that here's our key takeaways: is to manage the business effectively, you have to measure the key metrics. One of the most important metrics to keep track of is your client value. Client acquisition is the second most important. They go hand in hand. And then finally, every step of your sales process needs to be tracked. If it's important, it needs to be tracked. Here's how to contact us. So our phone number for our home care division, which handles home care and home health in our directory, is 855-590-8989. You can also email us at sales_homecare@caring.com. Those of you that were trying to reach me directly, you can do that there as well, and I will respond to that. That goes to our entire team there, and over which I manage that team, so I see all those emails. We also have at LinkedIn and at Twitter, the address is there. And then finally, this webinar, and Denise, you can probably chime in on the partners site, but this and other webinars are located at partners.caring.com.
Yes, on the events tab, it has both upcoming sessions as well as the prior sessions, recordings and slides. We really appreciate everyone taking time to join us today for Peter's presentation. We would love your feedback. You're going to be prompted with a quick survey after the session, but feel free to email or call with feedback as well. We love hearing from you and truly appreciate you joining us and providing feedback to us, especially our partners. So we look forward to working with you.
Thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you. Have a great day.